Hey everyone, welcome to the Kosher Intuitive. It is your hostess, comedian, hopefully your favorite comedian, intuitive energy, clairvoyant, healer, and life coach. And if anybody cares, investment realtor, Yael Meisels. How are you today? So in this topic, we're going to get into, which now that I've decided to start really putting my podcast together and, release episodes, we're gaining a following, things of that nature. I think it's maybe past time to start sharing the details of how I grew up. All right. Because what I think happens sometimes is that a person sees a put together person and they assume it's always been that way. And in my case, it definitely wasn't. It wasn't always a put together situation. And as I go through the events of my life, which I think everybody does as we approach Rosh Hashanah, I think to myself, like, not only how far I've come, just in life in general, but how I feel like I've just squashed by way of personal perseverance, every false claim, fallacy, and lie that's probably ever been told about me. If I haven't already squashed it, I probably can squash it. Because personal accountability is something that I was raised with, and I am not saying that in a positive tone. I feel as though it is so time for me to share what the beginning stages of all of this looked like and actually release episodes sharing my, how I was raised, sharing my experiences, how would this happen, how that happened. I was raised by a rape victim who was grossly mentally ill and had a baby, which is me, her only child, with a married man. Now, we are not going to get in too much about my dad today, but that is a story for another day, and it certainly will be something that is added to this podcast. But I feel like in order for that story to make sense, in order for that, and I really hate when we're discussing something that did happen. I really hate calling it a story. That's why I oftentimes call it a narrative, because I feel like sometimes the word story can imply something fiction when everything I've gone through is provable, is documented. I've been in therapy for, really started therapy at 5. There's been so much that I can just prove about myself with mental health records, medical records, school truancy records, things of that nature. How the woman who raised me, JP, Amakshimo, didn't end up losing custody of me and find herself in hot water with Detroit, with Child Protective Services when I was growing up, I don't know. She must have had a lot of rotten people having her back, because I could never get away. You guys have to understand something. One of the reasons I've grown to be such a voice in the rare abilitied space, in the Jewish world and the non-Jewish, why am I such a voice for it? Because of the amount of times that I personally have been all but literally crucified for having rare human phenomena like clairvoyant ability, clairaudient ability, clairscience ability, clairsentence ability. We'll get into a video about rare abilities in and of themselves another day, but I was raised by someone who truly, we're not going to get into spiritual things in this particular time, not that we're not going to, but it's not this particular episode is not necessarily about religion. It's more or less about what happened, okay, and how we got here. And religion plays a part of that, but there are so many other things that also factor into that, okay? Because in this episode, I'm going to talk about my brief time in the church, okay, which was one of the most pleasant experiences of my entire childhood, which makes me very different from a lot of the people who converted to Judaism. And I want to say, before I get into, as I like to say, the tuna of the sandwich, I am in, and don't you ever mince my words, because I would even go as far to try to legally sue you if I could. I am not a Christian. I do not believe in, stand for, or endorse the Christian Bible. I do not believe in any capacity that the individual known as Yeshua, Joshua, Jesus Christ, whatever you want to call him, is the Messiah, was the Messiah, and I am in no way a follower of that story. And I believe that if the JC could speak for himself, I believe in he would not be a follower of that story either. So, so I want to just say that I have no more or less allegiance to the JC as I would any person who I think is a genius who is probably misunderstood, and may have made mistakes and done things wrong out of the corruption unfolding at the time of the era. And just because I can understand all this shit doesn't make me a Christian. Just because I can understand where someone's coming from doesn't make me a follower, doesn't make me a Christian. So I want to make that so clear that although I did have pleasant experiences in the church, while I met some of the most sweet, loving, kind people, and still, am friends with one dear woman I went to church with, we're still friends to this day. I'm being honest with you. Like, there is nothing Christian about Yael Aviva Meisels. Okay? Nothing. So getting back to what we're talking about today is I'm, going to discuss the things that I went through growing up and how I built myself into who I am today and where I am and where I'm going and where, and where I've been. My first memory ever of my mother, who I really hate to refer to as a mother, because other than keep me alive, and give birth, she didn't really do a lot of mothering things. Yeah, she paid for things because she had to. She would have gotten in trouble with the law. I mean, this was a woman who really, didn't put a lot of thought and love and devotion into her commitment as a parent. And I think the JP, my biological mother, or as I like to refer to her as the one who raised me, I think JP wanted a baby for a couple of reasons that are exceptionally selfish. First and foremost, JP was a 34-year-old, never married. I'm sorry, she was married once as a teenager to escape her pedophile father. So that I wouldn't constitute that as a real marriage, a teenage girl who has to run, which is so sad, by the way, and it's obviously a heavy contributor to why and how JP turned into the monster she became. Obviously, it has so much to do with that. But she was a 34-year-old, I guess you would say once married, if you would consider that a marriage. No engagements after that. From the stories she shared with me while I was growing up, it didn't seem like many men were interested in having her as a partner. And it turns out the one time then this was obviously before my father, but there was a gentleman, I guess, who was dating JP and was with JP for quite a bit of time. And from the story that JP gave, he was planning a proposal. JP didn't know that. And so one day she decided to raise all kinds of hell, and he told her to fuck off 80 ways to Wednesday, that he was going to propose next week at the time. And that was that. There was a brief time after I was born where I guess a very sweet gentleman that JP had dated years prior to her, meeting my father and having a baby, had dated. I guess he was a good person, and he knocked on the door, and apparently he didn't know that JP was now a single mother. I, at the time, from what I understand, was probably, from what I've been told anyway, probably a month or so old. And this gentleman apparently wanted to get back together with her, and she told him to F off 80 ways to Wednesday. And when I meditate as a clairvoyant, clairaudient healer and coach on that particular situation, I know JP threw the best thing that was ever coming to her as a husband into the trash that day. Okay. Now bringing JP and El Lametta together, which is my biological father. So putting JP and El Lametta together, El Lametta was married, going through the beginning stages of, I guess, the divorce, and there was a separation, okay? JP and El Lametta did not live together, and JP did know that he was, still married to somebody else. From what I understand, they were separated. It is unclear if he lived in the home. I don't think he did. I would have hoped JP would not have been so stupid to get involved if he was living in the home, but you never know with her. But JP knew that El Lametta was a married man. And what she did not know, because, and what I heard from El Lametta in his lifetime, this was I hate to say it, but this was a very casual sexual relationship between El Lametta and JP. In the times that I did speak to El Lametta when he was alive, my biological father, he made very clear to me that this was never a woman he was seriously dating. She knew that this was something she wanted more than she was experiencing it. She was one of those women who do the things that unfortunately women still do now. If I sleep with him enough times and he sees how great I am, eventually he'll be my boyfriend, husband, and blah, right? Well, that didn't happen for JP, and I'll tell you something else. I don't know a lot of women that it happened for, and they are successfully married to those people. So from what I understand, and I'm not trying to be insulting, this is basically alludes to things that JP herself told me, and getting to the tuna and the sandwich in terms of El Lametta, this was a booty call. She was someone he had sex with and had drinks with. This was not a girlfriend, okay? She wanted to be his girlfriend. And apparently the reason it was not serious, and I don't know if she knew this, I'm hoping she didn't, El Lametta, who was separated from his wife, who was the mother of two of his God knows how many kids. This man's been married more times than fucking Elizabeth Taylor. But, he was trying to get back with his family while effing this chick on the side, who was turned out to be my biological mother. And was trying to mend fences with the wife, I guess. And JP, tells Elametta, excuse me, she's pregnant. He tells her to please terminate. She would not. And when JP thought she was going to trap this Detroit police officer into a marriage or into a life with her by getting herself pregnant. I am certain this was a deliberate pregnancy, probably to keep Elametta, done by JP. This is a tactic so many women use. And I even know married women who knew husbands. I've heard of married women. One person I used to be friends with, it's part of the reason I can't be friends with her anymore. I know of women who've taken out birth control and, knowing their spouse, boyfriend, whatever the hell, doesn't want more children and getting pregnant, behind someone's back. I suspect, based on the things JP has said and, just picking apart the truth in the salad of lies and I guess you could say the statements in the two conversations I did have with Elametta, this very likely was a deliberate act on her part, where she may have tampered with birth control or had made, claims of being on it, wasn't really on it, whatever the case may be. JP thought she was going to trap this police officer in a life with her by way of getting pregnant. When Elametta told JP there was no chance of them ever having a relationship life together, whatever the hell, JP then said Nana and a boo-boo to Elametta and his wife. All hell broke loose. JP went and told the wife she was pregnant. I do wonder if JP was a well person, if Elametta was a better person, right? Because he was clearly the rational. It wasn't the nice one between none of them are, neither one of them probably nice. He was definitely smarter than JP. I know my intelligence, IQ, human phenomena abilities have to be coming from Elametta and not JP, just based on his work resume. It would just be evident. Anywho, so all hell breaks loose. And I do wonder if JP had not made such a kaboom of the situation, maybe if the smoke had cleared, maybe Elametta at one point would decide to be a father to me, maybe not. We don't know. And there's, it is what it is at this juncture. But I do suspect there could be truth to the fact him staying away from me. And the reason I think this, by the way, is because there's been talk, especially by the one niece of JP's that I do speak to, that I do have a decent friendship with. She said to me the FBI showed up a couple of times throughout my childhood to ask questions because Elametta was a employee of theirs. So it is possible that this man was checking on me just to make sure I was okay. I don't know. Why the hell would he send the FBI to our door? JP was getting court-ordered check, deducted child support. There would be, and it certainly didn't come up on the two times that I spoke to Elametta, but JP may have shit me out of a relationship with my dad. Maybe. I suspect she probably did by just being such a psychopath. And seeing as how I knew this woman, I was raised by this crazy pants, I can imagine her being almost 35, pregnant and unmarried with a married man's baby, not knowing what to do. And she kept me in principle. She kept me to punish people. I was born to punish this police officer because he wouldn't marry her. I'm telling you, if God forbid I were in her situation, I would have terminated. One thing I've always stood for, one democratic value, is if a woman is physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually unable to care for a child, which was JP's situation, you terminate. JP was not well enough mentally to ever raise anything, okay? To ever have a human being in her custody. And just because she was your fun Aunt JP, she was a hellacious mother. You know, I believe that my whole life, you know, being born to this woman was to punish Elvametta and some sort of reckoning, you know? Like she had something to prove. Like, I can be a good mom. I can. I like babies. Well, you didn't like, she didn't like me. And I heard this from several people, especially after she passed, from sister-in-laws of hers, which again are nuts, but you know, who knows? Anyone who would be married to JP's brother would be crazy. JP's sister, Maximo, please God, will die. Please God, kill this woman. You know, her sister still stalks me to this day. You know what? There's been an episode of this podcast discussing that. But I was raised in complete chaos. My first memory of JP, I was almost 3. I remember sitting in the driveway of the house we lived in. She was going somewhere and I'm screaming and begging for her to stay. And she just keeps saying no over and over again. Screaming. And I'm screaming and crying. I was taken away by a babysitter, and JP angrily got in her car and backed out of the driveway like a bat out of hell and, you know, blazed down the street. Angry as a God knows what. Angrier than cat piss. That's my first memory of JP. I have another memory at 5 where we were living with her god-awful sister. And JP and I were in a brawl. I was 5. Do you understand? I was 5. JP and I were in a brawl. And I remember saying horrible, you know, cursing at JP and giving her the finger. And I thought to you know, when I reflect on that memory, I'm like, my children, who are my precious boys at 5 years old, wouldn't know what that meant. My children didn't know what the finger was at 5. When my kids were 5 years old, honest to God, one of the funniest things my son Zephaniah ever did, he comes into my room one day, and this is just a testament of how this kid was raised. We're living in Brooklyn. I had the door cracked open. He busts the door open. He goes, "Mommy!" I said, "Yeah, baby." He goes, my son Usher, he called him Ushy when he was little. He was 5. He goes, "Ushy is a stinker!" You know, because he's a stinker. He stinks. You know, that was a big, dirty word for Zephaniah at 5 years old. He was a stinker. My kids wouldn't have known the F word. They didn't know the F word. My kids didn't start swearing till they were about 11 years old, like everybody else's kids, for crying out loud. You know what I mean? My kids would never have fought with me like that. I mean, never. When you raise children with love and decency, you know, you have to understand something also. From 5 to 7, one of JP's distant cousins, whom she had not seen in 20 years, and JP had a job that required her to travel, and she was going to be damned that she quit that job. You know, she had worked hard for that job. And this, you know, my English name was Christine Sheila. And this Sheila shit that she had to deal with, well, fuck that Sheila. She was going to find that Sheila the cheapest place for Sheila to stay. And God, who the fuck cares what happens to Sheila? That was JP. That was JP. That was her whole life. That was JP. And it wasn't well, this is going to be a long podcast today. So the sexual abuse started from 5 to 7 because JP found at a gas station in Hazel Park, Michigan in 1989 a distant cousin she hadn't seen in 20 plus years who had married some Chaldean man from Iraq, who she had 2 children, and JP and this woman, Debbie, met at a gas station. And it was Debbie's daughter who sexually assaulted me for 2 years, and Debbie's son who sexually harassed me for 2 years. This gentleman is now living as a gay man. And from what I understand, Amakshimo, may he drop dead. And the woman who I understand, I want to make something clear. At 39, I finally said, I got to do something about this. I got to know, for the sake of just myself and God, my children, for the victims I stand up for, the victims I'm an advocate for. I had to at least attempt to put Debbie's daughter, Leela, my assailant, my attacker, in prison. And I did give a police report, and the prosecutor did investigate. And because I was 39, and because the abuse happened between 5 and 7 and was never reported, because Leela, the sexual predator, obviously threatened to kill me all over the place. I was 5. She was about 11. This was a person who was old, and I can't, this is what happened. And yes, police reports were filed. Yes, because this did happen. Yes, I at least tried to bring myself some sort of legal justice in this world, to bring this predator to justice, so that this predator, Leela, will get justice in this world and the next world. Who knows? We're both still alive. Maybe God will perform a miracle and she will get justice in this world and be punished for the hellacious things she did to me. But also her mother had a husband who was an abusive Chaldean man who beat everybody with belts and things. And when he would go to work, her mother would run off with her children and me to see her boyfriend. The children knew the mother was committing adultery. And from 5 to 7, this was the hellhole I lived in. I was subjected to severe physical beatings. One of the scariest memories I ever have as a kid, the woman her daughter who was sexually assaulting me when I was 6 years old, I remember I had a red coat and I think it was like a pink backpack. It may have been some sort of Little Mermaid or something. I remember shades of pink. Anyways, I was thrown violently down a flight of stairs. And when I look back on that memory, all right, I think a miracle happened. I think I was supposed to die. All right. Because I am looking, when I think back on that event in my life, I am seeing that event as a person observing, not a person experiencing, which means I do believe my soul separated from my body during that vicious assault where I was thrown down the steep set of stairs and onto a concrete floor. I was in pain for months after that assault. All right. There was always a reason to beat me with sticks and, just always a reason to hit me with things. I was subjected to real violence. And JP, Amakshimo, who I am convinced the woman who raised me is such an evil stain on humanity that I don't even think the soul that was JP still exists. My hope and prayer is that God Almighty took mercy and rendered the harshest judgment, and after sending JP to hell, stomped her soul out of creation. That is what I hope for the woman who raised me as a result of the things that happened to me. Immediately after JP lost the job that required her to travel, and I just want to make clear, JP traveled 4 to 7 days a week. So from 5 to 7, 4 out of the 7 days a week, that JP would travel, I would be at this babysitter being molested and being beaten. Okay? Horrible. And when I would try to discuss with sick JP what was going on, sick JP told me that was what brothers and sisters do. This woman I don't think she knew about the sex abuse. This woman was insane. She was insane. Okay? And we're going to get into a couple of stories that will show you how insane this woman was. When I was 7, the summer that I was going into 3rd grade, so turning 8, the only reason the sexual abuse started is because I was taken out of the assailant's home. All right? Because JP lost her traveling job. That kept her away a minimum of 4 days a week. And first thing JP does, the neighbors had moved out of the house next door, and some bum who smelled like molten motor oil, who shit on JP for the next 20 years and shit on me, she met and fell in love with a man that has hair out to here. He's 6'7" and gumpy. You'd swear he's a pedophile. I promised you he wasn't. Because listen, the truth is bad enough. I don't need to, demonize a demon for demonic activity he didn't do when he did other demonic activity. This man is demonized to hell anyway. You know what I mean? He didn't have to be a pedophile. He was evil. He just wasn't that color of evil. All right? Clearly as evil as JP. And he would make sure when JP and I, when he took us out to dinner, that JP paid for her, herself and me. This man never gave this woman a reason to believe that he was going to take care of her. I remember throughout the course of my adolescence and childhood, JP crying and begging this man to marry her, so she could have health insurance, and he just would not. He even went as far as to buy her an engagement ring and taunted it in front of her for 5 years before he gave it. So he didn't even give it to her. He let her wear it when JP died. We have a podcast talking about this. He searched around every relative, and by luck would have it, I ran into him at a bike store. The man literally went searching for a dead woman's ring, and he wanted to make sure everybody knew that was not an engagement ring. He let her wear it. Grr. Anyway, horrible people. So around 14, and this man is mean. I just want to make that so clear. In fact, he was such a mean person, such a negligent person to his own daughter. His daughter got married and got pregnant and married at 15 years old. JP's boyfriend and his ex-wife signed over parental rights to the husband, who was, I think, 19 or 20, for knocking up his 15-year-old daughter to marry her. It was horrendous. This was JP's boyfriend. You want to tell me these people knew how to raise children? Jesus H. Christ. Lord Almighty, avenge me for the horrible things that happen. I can't, this isn't even about forgiveness. This is just what happened. This woman received the ultimate punishment for her sins. Of course she doesn't deserve forgiveness. In fact, the story of JP should teach all of us a lesson. The only legacy this woman has is how to never be. That's her only legacy, is she was such a horrendous person. You just do the total opposite. If she paints her house yellow, paint yours beige. For fuck's sake, do nothing that woman does. And, watching JP do these things and hit me. I mean, this woman beat me every chance she got. And when the hitting finally stopped, and I don't know that her one living sister, who's not going to be living much longer, please God, let us have that miracle, please God, right now. But I don't know that the one living sister or the siblings knew to what extent she was physically violent. But when I was about 13 or such, I was in martial arts for about 2 years or so. And I started to restrain this woman when she would try to physically assault me. When I was growing up, I was hit with chopping boards. I was hit with brushes. I was hit with shoes. This woman would hit me over and over and over again. And the sick part is JP did this in front of my friends who were little children. One of my dearest friends now, whose mother was and is, we lost her mother at 20 when we were 22. My friend Natalie's mother's Karen is and was one of the sweetest women in the whole world. And Natalie would go home and tell her mother what she had seen JP do to me. And eventually it got to the point Natalie wasn't able to come over. My friend Brianne across the street was only able to come over. I mean, she was, Brianne and I were both witnesses to each other's horror story, and when, please God, if my friend Brianne is ever ready to tell her story, believe me, you have a safe space, you have the floor. But her sister, her 77-year-old sister who stalks me, who has, I'm convinced, lesbian feelings for me, and there's reasons I think that. I know her sister, who's 77 years old, has pedophilic feelings towards my children. She tried to kidnap them when they were little. The police have been involved pertaining to her sister, whose initials are PPL, several times. At one point, a restraining order was granted by a judge, so she legally couldn't come near me. So her sister, PPL, JP's sister, PPL, has really been, I mean, there was even a time when Usher and Zephania were tiny babies around the time her sister tried to kidnap them, where her son asked if he could have my children because I was going through a divorce. Sick, right? And when I said no, later that day, the tires on my SUV were slashed, so I couldn't take my children and run. So I'm saying these are the types of things JP's family has done to me, trying to kidnap my children. I know her sister has sexual feelings for my children. She has sexual feelings for me because there are people who get sexually turned on by, and this is, again, JP was raped. I mean, let's just put it like this. JP's sexual abuse from her father started so young in her life that by the time JP and her sister PPL, the one who's still alive that we're just desperate to see die, JP and PPL were taken into foster custody when JP was about 5 and PPL was approaching 7. Now, JP and PPL at that point in life were being sexually violated by their father, and how they were put into foster care custody is because their father was obviously raping all of his children. And there was a situation with their elder sister. I don't know if she had become pregnant. I suspect she probably did. But it was, the children were removed out of the home because I mean, this is a suspect. This is just my assumption. It's what I think, because they were taken out of the home because he was sexually assaulting the older sister, and that was confirmed. That was, he was prosecuted for that. And that was why all these children, and JP was one of 13 kids. Clearly, this deranged man who was JP's father was a sex addict. He used to walk around swigging booze, holding guns. Apparently, he used to beat his wife with guns. If something happened that he didn't like, when these, once poor children that became demonic adults, he would have them hold out their hands like this, and whoever's hand was shaking, he would deem as guilty and mercilessly beat them. So at the time that JP and her sister PPL were taken out of their home, they were already being sexually assaulted. Now, JP told me PPL was sexually assaulted. PPL has sworn up and down she had never been sexually violated. You know what? she's a liar. You can't, I'm sorry, PPL, you can't be the way you are today without some sort of hellacious violence in your history that you obviously haven't come to terms with or began to heal from. I think that's part of what your lesbian feelings towards me are. I think that's part of your, why your pedophilic feelings towards my children. Because PPL, who also cheated on her husband numerous times, and then when he died of malpractice by my doctor's office, sued and got $2 million. This woman is evil as shit, okay? Cheated on the man left, right, and center, at least according to your sister JP, you did, which I'm sure you did, because you're a charlatan and a harlot and a pedophile and a lesbian. There's just too much here that would be indicative of people who've experienced this type of abuse that received absolutely no treatment or healing. And I'm going to make something very clear. JP's sister, PPL, has stalked me for 25 years. Like I said in the beginning of this show, law enforcement has been so involved. And the niece of JP, who was her son's daughter, who's I have a friendship with, this woman has told me that PPL, JP's sister, on 3 separate occasions. And the reason she told me this was because she was extremely uncomfortable and extremely disgusted that this was, happening. So PPL, I want you to know your brother's daughter that I am friends with thinks you're disgusting. Okay? She told me everything you say to her, comes back to me, goes to the police. She's the police funnel. All right? That on 3 separate occasions, she really did try to engage this woman from, I guess you'd call her my relative. I don't consider her family. I consider her a friend from the past. But because she was engaged 3 times in conversation to discuss my children's genitals, whether or not they're circumcised. And PPL had said to this relative that, Jewish people don't circumcise their kids when circumcision exists because of Judaism, like in its entirety, just FYI. Anyone who doesn't know that, circumcision as a whole exists because the Jews started doing it as a result of the covenant between God and Abraham. And again, this is not a topic on religion today. But we know her sister, the 77-year-old stalker that's had restraining orders, put against her to keep her away from our family. We know she sits there and thinks about my children's genitals because she's a sick woman. To the best of my knowledge, she's a non-offending pedophile. It wouldn't surprise me if the woman has had quiet relationships with women. She gives you the lipstick lesbian vibe. She truly does. She calls herself a short abbreviation for her name. I'm not going to say what it is. But just like my English name is Christine. My first English name is Christine. It's actually Christine Sheila Nicole, right? So if I were, a butch lesbian, no disrespect, no shade. I'm just talking about what happened. I might call myself Chris. So PPL's name, she calls herself something similar, which would be a man's name. Just like Chris, which could be short for Christine, could also be a man's name. So there are so many small things that if you're paying attention to detail, you could seriously see how her 77-year-old sister is a closeted lesbian. Also, her sister is stunning, even in her 70s. It's scary how someone so pretty could be so dangerous and so psychotic and mental. I truly think she is a tortured person who was so sexually violated as a child. She lost her shit, and hence we have the pile of evil shit we have today. I think she was a closeted lesbian. there's so much evidence there, because a woman that looks the way PPL does, even in her 70s, can walk into a room, command the attention of the room because she's so pretty, and get any kind of man within any type of tax bracket that she wants, because she's a beautiful woman. And let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, beautiful opens doors. And I truly think this woman, could have had any man she wanted. And considering she's been single since her the husband she cheated on died, that she then sued for. People are so evil. It's disgusting. There's just such a place in hell before they all get stomped out. Oh, these people are sick. But she hasn't had a man in her life since the 80s. Women that look like that, I'm telling you, get wined and dined. Women who look like that get spoiled by someone. And let's be honest, PPL, they're women. Now, that's okay. You're allowed to be a lesbian. You're not allowed to be a pedophile. You're not allowed to come near me because you'll get in legal trouble. You are so clearly a lesbian, and I think you're a lesbian with lesbian feelings for me. I think her sister is so evil. If she could rape me, she would. Her sister called Child Protective Services on me so many times that someone in my life, a dear friend, utilized connections to see if the most recent Child Protective Services case that was filed against me years ago, but I'm just saying it was the last one. Thank God. Thank you, God. Thank God. We now have a connection, because we have to make sure that she's not stalking again, because she's made dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens upon dozens of CPS calls that we now have to do dirty things, like have a connection to know if this woman is stalking again. And it turns out through that connection, this very dear individual and I utilized, we found out that it was a old girlfriend of mine who has a history of running after transgender women. I found this out after the fact, by the way. A girl I used to be friends with called CPS and made up stories like, just for example, my children's beds were being put together, and I had like the mattresses on the floor in my room until the beds were being put together. The beds had just come a couple days before, and all the beds were, put, before you put it together, you got all the pieces strung out there on the bedroom floor. She told CPS my children didn't have beds. She told CPS, because I have a cleaning lady, I don't know how to clean. Who the fuck cares? I have a cleaning lady. She told CPS that because at the time in my downstairs bathroom, they were fixing the water line to the hot water, that we didn't have running hot water. Like, I live in a townhouse. I mean, I own it, but I'm saying part of my HOA on the townhouse is a water bill. Like, I'm never going to be without water, thank God, Baruch Hashem. So, but I'm saying we were able to find out, so we can act accordingly, who was doing it. And what's so funny is the girlfriend who actually did do it, who I need to make so clear, I am not friends with in any way, shape, or form, have nothing to do with that woman, haven't spoken to her in a very long time. But this woman checked herself into 24 hours after making that call to Child Protective Services on me. She checked herself into a psychiatric facility and was there, I believe, for the next 3 to 4 weeks. And there was a serious hospitalization. And I'm sure, there's a reason I'm not friends with this woman anymore. And I think there was a reason, I was friends with her to begin with, because for a long time, I really did want to heal people that, reminded me of my mother, the woman who raised me. It's sometimes I feel like because I couldn't help this woman, I want to try to help other women. But we learn as life coaches. We learn as, people that are not only coaching other people, but people who get coached and people who are in therapy, which I am a big advocate for. We can't save everybody. And it was so hard for me to not be able to save her. But I can't. And I love her. I pray for her. I've forgiven her for what she did to me. It's the irony is literally like that day she went into, no, I'm sorry. It was the next day. She went into a psychiatric hospital here in the Detroit area called Stonecrest. This young lady really is and was mentally sick. Everybody in the community who knows her, we know she's a nice person. She wants to do nice things, but she's just mentally can't do it. Hence why I just can't be her friends. I've lots of love from over here, but can't be her friend. Because we can't save everybody, and I, for a long time, had real sorrow that I couldn't save her, real sorrow. She made up silly lies to CPS. We know she did it. She can't do it again. Thank God. So sad. The people we can't save and the people we want to save because they remind us of the people from our past that we couldn't save. And something that we all have to know is none of us are savable without the personal desire and human will to want to be a saved person and live a good life and a proper life and a decent life and, doing the things responsible people do. Not all of us can do that. And I wish we could. There was so much growing up. When I was 19, I think it was about right before I turned 19. I was talking to my therapist because, again, I've been in therapy since I was 5 years old. And majority of my life, by the way, I was censored in therapy. JP would either sit in the session with me or I would be so bullied in the car on the way to therapy and told all the things I wasn't allowed to talk about because JP knew if I told the therapist, she would be in legal trouble. She had to have known that because nobody else, my children for at one point in time in therapy, and finally my son Usher, God love him, is such a sweet boy. Like we were driving in the car one day, it was just Usher and I, and he was like, "Mom, can I say something?" Yeah. He goes, "My life is fucking awesome. Can I leave therapy?" And I was like, "You know what? Sure." And we talked, we had a deeper conversation about it. I was, don't say the F word. But he was like 13 already. But he's like, I don't have a need for this. He goes, "I understand I don't have a dad in my life." But he goes, "But I have I have you, you're my best friend." Like anyone who even went to the bar mitzvah. My son Usher sat there at the podium and told the whole congregation in his bar mitzvah speech that I am his best friend. Usher and I, my son, are best friends. We have so many common interests. We both love to go to the gym and swim and sit in the hot tub. Really, Zephania and I have common grounds too. Believe me, he's my precious baby. He's my little Zephania David Alicia. I love him. He's my little baby. But we love our children differently. We highlight and celebrate the wonderful things about each child. And it's just so funny because Usher and I remember when I was little, when Usher was little, the first time I lost a bunch of weight, hopefully this time it stays, please God. But I was, I had bought a beautiful pair of brown velvet Gucci slacks that I got thrifted for like next to nothing. For those of you who know about my thrifting obsession, I can thrift better than anyone. High fashion, low fashion, medium fashion. I can thrift it better than anybody you know. Anywho, I remember I had a big meeting at the brokerage I was working for, and Usher and I were picking out my outfit because I used one of the bars in his closet for some of my clothes because most of their clothes at that age would go, were in the dresser. And he picked out my outfits, and we would, pick out his outfit. And even now, like Usher and I are like, it's so funny because Usher is like such a fashion sense person. And like the girls, stay away from my baby. He's only 13. I'll come after you ladies. But I have seen like teenage girls when we're in the mall look at my boys like, hey Stacey, guess what? Like seriously, these are gorgeous kids, and they have such amazing fashion sense. They have such amazing taste. I can't get enough of these kids, and I don't even know where I was going with this. I just went off on a tangent how much I love this child, but both of these children, the connection that my children and I have is never something this JP and I had. And, I just feel like I really don't even remember what I was talking about because I was just so elated to talk about my son, Usher. But I feel far from where I've been. Usher left therapy because Stefania was like, thank God, I'd rather go to the gym. Like these kids were like, we don't have problems. Like we don't have the upbringing you had. We've always had a mother in our life that has been our biggest advocate, biggest supporter, and they know that. So I'm actually quite proud, but I'm going to be in therapy until my last breath. But if for no other reason, because of what I do for a living as a coach. But what we need to start talking about and creating a safe space for is the way we were raised does affect us for the rest of our lives. I could not be the person I am today. And this isn't about wealth or money, because those are God's decisions. I'm serious. Whether you're going to have money or not is decided on Rosh Hashanah. It's God's decision, not yours, not anybody else's. It's not our choice. It's God's choice. But I could never be who I am today without a tremendous amount of mental, spiritual, physical, emotional, financial, psychiatric care constantly. Energy healing, supplements, working out, therapy. I do all the things because that's how I stay healthy. And so what I was trying to get at before and how I went off on the tangent about the greatness of my little guys is, they were in therapy for about a year, and I can't even remember, I've never said anything to them. The only thing I've ever discussed with them is if my son comes to me and I've asked, we're talking about a problem, oh, why don't you run it by your therapist? Or did you talk about it with your therapist so he, could give you his perspective? I think that's probably the only narrative that's ever been an exchanging of words between myself and my children about what they discussed in therapy. And believe you me, therapists are mandated reporters. If and your girl Yael has never gotten away with one mistake in life, I guarantee you, if these kids had ever said anything to their therapist, nobody has mercy on me other than the Lord Almighty and my children and a handful of other people. I hope one day that will change, but please God. But the way history has been, people have been very mean to me and have been very, very, very quick to not give me the benefit of the doubt. I promise you, their therapist would have reported me like that without thought. Really, no thought would have reported me. Especially with the amount of reports that have been made against me. Nobody would hesitate, I promise you. It just has to be that my kids were probably talking about things that, if I can't even venture to guess, but it had very little to do with me, I'm sure. But I want people to know, I'm going to close with two stories. The summer going in to 6th grade. Okay, I had to think for a second because I was 10 turning 11. I was put at the home of a friend of mine from school who everybody knew because the police were constantly involved, that her mother's husband, who was a Mexican immigrant, married her for citizenship, sexually violated her daughter all the time. There was physical evidence, bruising. The summer prior, this young lady who I was friends with from school and, friends with in life, it's one of the, God heal her and everything and give her all the miracles, a person on earth deserves for everything this poor girl went through. I still think of her. I still pray for her. It was one of the scariest days of my life was when Anna showed up to the babysitter the year prior to her mother being my babysitter, with a bite mark on her thigh, about 2 or so inches from her vagina. It was on her inner thigh. You could see black bite marks on her legs where her mother's husband had assaulted her, I guess, in the car on the way to the babysitter's house. This was a vicious, violent man. And it was my last day of school, of 5th grade going into 6th grade. And JP, my biological, the woman who raised me, told me that this young lady, I'm not going to say her name. I never would want to embarrass somebody, but anyone who grew up with me, her first name begins with an A, her last name began with a V. We all remember it from, Ashley's house, whose mother was an awesome person and great babysitter. So come on, we all know who I'm talking about, who follow this show, that have known me since childhood. You probably do. I know that girlfriends of mine in life, from that era of my life, we've discussed her as adults. And her mother babysat me. And when I tried to take up issue with it, because I had already been sexually assaulted for 2 years, JP did not know that. And even if she knew that, she wouldn't have believed it. I had nobody to tell. And JP was doing the dishes when I said I can't go to her house because her mother's husband, touches her privates and, hurts her. JP threw the dishes into the sink, screaming and yelling, and told me that her mother's husband wasn't going to be home. She put her one and only 10-year-old daughter, only a demonic person puts their 10-year-old daughter in a pedophile's house knowingly. But that's what happened. JP was so sexually violated. She didn't care if someone was going to sexually violate her kid. This Sheila was her piñata for her and her family. I mean, do whatever you want to the Sheila. That's what, the JP Maximo would think. I'm just thankful when I converted to Judaism, I was able to change my name, because I'm telling you, I have never looked in the mirror and seen a Christine Sheila. Never. JP's boyfriend, and I'm gonna share a lot as we go into the season, but the story that I will close with is the first Christmas, which I have such triggering feelings around Christmas, and it has nothing to do with religion. It was just the most horrible time of the year for me, because JP was financially strapped, trying to do this Santa shit, this Christmas shit, this, mommy shit that she didn't want any part of, and she would live her childhood through me and buy beautiful toys, and then scream and yell on how I took care of them, because they were never taken care of properly in her mind. Because again, JP was so sick. She wanted those toys for herself, because so she would see the way that I took care of my toys, which wasn't bad. But it wasn't the way she would take care of her. She was such a sick lady. This woman was so sick. So it was around Christmas time. No, I'm sorry. It was around Thanksgiving time going into Christmas time, because I actually got the item that year for Christmas. But that fall, JP, when I was 15 years old, and her boyfriend had just bought a house that the JP couldn't afford. Wasn't even that nice of a house, but I digress. Apparently, JP had decided in October there was going to be, because it was around Halloween time. The reason I thought Christmas is because we're going to get to it. I got the thing on Christmas. Anyway, so around Halloween time, JP made the decision, okay? She made the decision that there was just going to be no money this year to buy me a coat. Now, wait a second. Do we still live on Earth? You couldn't get a coat from a thrift store. You couldn't get a coat. You couldn't knock on your satanic sister's door and get, are you serious right now? But when I was 15, I was told there was no money around Halloween for me to have a coat. And then the JP told me that her boyfriend, who hated my guts, every time I would sit down to eat a meal, would make a disgusting barnyard animal sound since I was a little girl about the way I would just eating. I still to this day at 41 have a phobia eating in front of people. When I sit at your table eating in front of you, you don't know how hard that was for me to learn to do that. Just to sit at a table and have a meal in front of other people. You won't usually see me at restaurants. Why? You have to eat in front of other people. Still to this day, I struggle to eat in front of other people because of the way JP, the sick fuck who raised me, her boyfriend, used to treat me every time I ate anything. And this was a man who gave up custody of his pregnant daughter to her 20-year-old husband at 15 so she could get married. These people are satanic, if they're not satanic, they're demonic pigs. And how her sister to this day can defend her fucking honor, I don't know. But I'll tell you this much, PPL. You better let your 3 pig children know I'm going to blast your ass. And there ain't a goddamn thing they can do about it when you finally die. Please, God, may you die soon for the sins you have committed against me, if not for any other fucking reason. So, JP wasn't going to buy me a coat. And JP told me her boyfriend was going to graciously offer to buy me a coat, but he had a list of demands. That all the chores I had to do because I had a coat, where to put the coat, what was going to happen to me and the coat if I had left it, on the back of a chair. These people were sick. Her demonic sister, who still stalks me, who talks about my children's genitalia, that Christmas bought me a coat from Old Navy. That entire winter until the fucking Christmas, I wore hoodies and sweaters and beanie hats, walking outside. You don't know what I went through. Members of her family. I hate you people for such good reason. Please don't ever contact me. Please stay away from me. Please don't. Just forget I exist. I hate you people. You're so evil. But this was how I was raised. And this is just a taste of how I was raised. And why I will spend the rest of my life fighting and being an advocate and a support and a healer and a friend to victims. Because if we survived, which we did, we have to thrive. We have to be the best version of ourselves. The Holy Lord of everything will allow us to be on planet Earth. We have to do that because we survived for a reason. Our lives were meant to be. We were supposed to be, and we persevered, and we did it anyway against all odds. And the reason I became an expert in the paranormal and the supernatural and understanding rare human phenomena is because of the years I was nailed to a cross for just being different. That was the first of probably part 2 and 3 of how I was raised. We didn't even get to how I came into Judaism. But what we did touch on, I hope tells you a lot of where I was, what I did, and who I am. And anyone who comes to the Kosher Intuitive, even though our 2 to 3 hour sessions, which is the length of a session, especially your first one, they are at $350 a session, sliding scale, pricing does, we do have for those who qualify, and you will have to qualify. And I want you to know that nobody affiliated with this establishment, not myself that runs the Kosher Intuitive, or any of my girlfriends or colleagues that are, I refer clients to, we have never turned someone away because of the inability to pay, which brings me to my next point. In a given year, I give thousands and thousands in discounts and free sessions to people in need. If you can, and if you feel inclined to do so, to donate to this cause, so I can continue to help support, heal, and bring personal justice for victims and people struggling all over the world, please reach out. It is so important, and you have no idea. I've helped people that you can't. I'm not going to get into it because I'm not here to martyr myself. If you feel inclined to do so, to donate to this cause, please know that I'm a single mother of twins. I am on one income. My ex-husband participates in not at all. He is not. He is his own pile of mess, which we will get into part 2 about how I was raised and how it affected me in my first 2 marriages under 30. But you really have to know that it is the goodness and kindness in my heart that, and just my, remembering where I've been, that makes me never want to say no to people, because it's like, there's been times where it's like, I know that myself and or my colleagues were the only people alive that can help you. There's times I know that. So that is why I'm asking, if anyone does feel inclined to do so, please God, please donate to our cause. And remember, all consultations are free, and you must have a consultation and fill out paperwork to be a client. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for your support, your love, and your blessings, and your motivation to make me be the best person I can be, so I can help you be the best person you can be. And together we can just be the best at everything we do. God bless you. Wishing you all a wonderful day, and I will see you next topic.